Distinguidas delegaciones, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, distinguished delegations. I now call to order the 33rd meeting of the 34th session of the Human Rights Council.
Vamos a dar inicio.
We are now going to proceed to have an interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. It is now my pleasure to welcome the Special Rapporteur, Ms. Sheila Kita-Root. Before giving the floor to the Special Rapporteur, I would like to remind you that last Thursday, the 23rd of February, at 5 p.m., the online system for inscription on the lists of speakers was opened, and that the list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. Pursuant to Resolution 32/24, I now invite Ms. Kita-Root to present her oral update on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. You have the floor, Madam.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On the 1st of July 2016, the Human Rights Council extended the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea for 1 year, requesting the mandate holder to follow up on the implementation of the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea, contained in its final report submitted to the Council in June 2016. 3 months prior to my June report, in today's oral update, I plan to, first of all, provide highlights of my activities since the renewal of the mandate, focus on selected number of key recommendations which the Commission addressed to the government of Eritrea and to the international community, briefly address key issues in the situation of human rights in Eritrea. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, since the extension of the mandate, I have held consultations in Switzerland from the 1st to the 8th of September 2016, in Brussels, Belgium, from 26th to 30th September, in Arusha, Tanzania, from 21st to 26th November, on the margins of the Symposium and High-Level Dialogue on Human Rights in Africa, and in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, from 28th to 30th November. The central point of discussions was the follow-up regarding the findings and recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry on the Human Rights in Eritrea with several member states, the EU and AU officials, civil society organizations and other interlocutors. The Commission's call for accountability for those responsible for crimes and human rights violations identified in its final report presented to you in June 2016 still echoes in this room. Cognizant of the fact that the exercise of national jurisdiction is not only a right, but also a state duty, the Commission called on the government of Eritrea to ensure accountability for past and persistent human rights violations and crimes through the establishment of independent, impartial, and gender-sensitive mechanisms, ensuring that victims are provided with adequate redress, including the right to truth and reparations. I am not aware of any steps taken by the government towards substantial institutional and legal reform to hold perpetrators to account at the domestic level. Thus, I have and will continue to advocate for the implementation of the Commission's additional recommendations on accountability addressed to the international community and each individual state, aimed at ensuring justice for the victims that have suffered serious human rights abuses in Eritrea. During my interactive dialogue at the General Assembly in October 2016, I briefed member states about the findings of the Commission, namely its conclusion that there are reasonable grounds to believe that Eritrean officials have committed crimes against humanity since 1991. I called on member states to submit the report of the Commission of Inquiry to the Security Council for a referral of the human rights situation in Eritrea to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Mr. President, I organized a side event on the margins of the symposium on the 10th anniversary of the African Court on Human and People's Rights, the 5th annual high-level dialogue on democracy, human rights, women's rights and governance in Africa, held in Arusha, Tanzania, from 21st to 26th November. The main objective of the Arusha mission was to follow up on the Commission's recommendations, calling on the African Union to establish an accountability mechanism to investigate, prosecute, and try individuals reasonably believed to have committed crimes against humanity. The fight against impunity at the multilateral level does not stop here. An increasing number of universal jurisdiction trials in several African and European countries, as well as in Australia, Canada, and the US, are encouraging developments. The Commission specifically called on individual member states to exercise jurisdiction over crimes against humanity when any alleged offender is present on the territory of a member state. I intend to increase efforts towards justice to be served in third countries, as Eritrea is not showing any inclination to acknowledge the crimes committed, let alone respond to the need for justice. I reiterate my plea to all to undertake every effort to hold accountable individual perpetrators responsible for the crimes identified by the Commission to serve justice for the Eritrean victims that have suffered serious abuses. Beyond that, it is incumbent on all of us to demonstrate that such behavior is simply unacceptable anywhere in the world, even more so today. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome efforts by international actors to reinforce engagement with Eritrea, which is a positive development after years of isolation. I understand that the UN team in Asmara is currently being strengthened with the deployment of several senior advisors who will focus on issues such as peace, development, youth, migration, and the UPR. The EU, under the 11th European Development Fund, the EU is supporting Eritrea in the implementation of UPR recommendations. I hope that the support of the government's preparation for the next UPR will be accompanied by an implementation of the recommendations formulated by member states during the 2014 UPR in a comprehensive manner. I look forward to seeing Eritrea's report for its third review in 2018. I invite the government to use this opportunity to demonstrate its genuine efforts to improve the overall situation for the people on the ground, but above all, to make evident its tangible progress in the situation of human rights and the enjoyment of the full spectrum of human rights. The UPR offers a framework for progress on a number of critical areas: economic, social, cultural, as well as civil and political rights. Let me reiterate that engagement needs to be grounded, based on facts, and as indicated, there is little to suggest that the human rights situation has changed. I'm worried that the renewed engagement may fail to address critical human rights issues in an effort to curb migration. It would be serious should member states be prepared to sacrifice the respect for human rights of Eritreans for short-term gains. Positive change in the situation of human rights by 2018 will require genuine commitment and serious determination by the government of Eritrea to address the key areas identified by the Commission of Inquiry and my own mandate. So far, I have seen little progress that could be identified as actual improvement in the situation of human rights in the country. In effect, there has been no progress on any of the key areas identified by the Commission of Inquiry in its recommendations addressed to the government of Eritrea. The Commission called on Eritrea to implement fully and without delay the 1997 Constitution. Following announcement by President Isaias Afewerki in 2014, there has been that a new constitution would be drafted. We heard in 2016 that a committee was established for such a purpose. Surely, such a process, which would have profound impact on the lives of all Eritreans, would have to take place in a transparent and participatory manner. Yet, there is no, if very little, easily accessible information about the different steps directed towards bringing such a project to fruition. The Commission concluded that there are reasonable grounds to believe that Eritrean officials have committed the crime of enslavement within the context of the military and national service programs. When detailing its findings, the Commission referred to several aspects of the military and national service programs, in particular, the arbitrary and open-ended duration of conscription, routinely for years beyond the 18-month provided by the decree of 1995. Consequently, the Commission called on the government to discontinue indefinite military service by limiting it to 18 months for all current and future conscripts, as stipulated by the Proclamation on National Service. It appears that today the government has not taken any measures for the temporal limitation of the national military service, which thus continues to be indefinite. The Commission further found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the Eritrean officials had committed the crime of imprisonment and enforced disappearance. The Commission highlighted the arrests and detention in violation of fundamental rules of international law that have been and remain central to an Eritrean state policy. In most cases, the government officials have refused to provide information about the fate or whereabouts of those detained, thereby intending to deprive victims of the protection of the law for a prolonged period of time and to create fear among their relatives in a manner inconsistent with international law. Consequently, the Commission called on the government to release immediately and unconditionally all those unlawfully and arbitrarily detained, and to provide information on the fate and whereabouts of all those deprived of physical liberty, including on all prisoners of war. It also called on the government to put an end to the practice of arbitrary arrest and detention of individuals based on their religious belief, and release immediately and unconditionally all those unlawfully and arbitrarily detained, including the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church. I continue to receive reports of new cases of arbitrary arrest and detention, including most recent cases since the beginning of the year. The reasons appear to fall in the broad categories already identified by the Commission, namely attempting to evade military service or trying to assist a family member to do so, trying to leave the country, practicing an unauthorized religion, or offending a high-ranking government or PFDJ official. I have not, however, been informed of any releases or information shared on the fate of any of the high-profile cases of enforced disappearance, which includes former fighters of the Eritrean Liberation Front detained in 92, Jehovah's Witnesses detained in 1994, Muslim teachers in Karen detained in 94, members of the Afar ethnic group detained in the 1998-1999, the G15 political critics and journalists detained in 2001, scores of Muslims detained for protesting against the appointment of a mufti in 2007, or those alleged to have participated in the attempted takeover of the Ministry of Information building at Forto, detained in 2013. The only exception remains the March 2016 release by the government of Eritrea of 4 Djiboutian prisoners of war detained in 2008, and its announcement that 1 prisoner of war had died. However, 13 prisoners of war still remain unaccounted for. The Commission further urged the government to immediately permit unhindered access by independent monitors to all places of detention with regard to both legality and conditions of detention, including OHCHR and other recognized organizations. I am aware that the government of Eritrea continues to grant access to the country to bilateral and international delegations. However, none of these visitors or any of the foreign diplomats or staff of international organizations based in Asmara have been permitted to visit any places of detention. I have no information as to whether the independent monitoring of prison figures in any of the ongoing discussions and visits. The Commission found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that Eritrean officials have committed the crime of torture against persons under their control. It concluded that the use of torture was and remains an integral part of government's repression of the civilian population. Consequently, the Commission called on the government to establish adequate complaint mechanisms and ensure investigations are conducted into all allegations of torture and ill treatment with a view to bringing perpetrators to justice. The government was widely praised for the 2014 ratification of the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Notwithstanding the ratification, I have not heard about any steps the government has taken that would suggest its seriousness in putting an end to the systematic and widespread use of torture by Eritrean officials in civilian and military detention centers. Can I continue? Thanks. The Commission concluded that there are reasonable grounds to believe that Eritrean officials have committed the crime of rape, both in the context of military and national service in detention centers. In committing this crime, perpetrators took advantage of the coercive environment and in many cases also used force to treat or threat of force. Consequently, the Commission called on the government to implement a zero-tolerance policy for sexual abuse in the army and in detention centers, and to establish complaint mechanisms and to ensure the prompt and adequate investigation, prosecution, and accountability of perpetrators. Again, I have not been informed of any government efforts to address sexual abuse in the army, detention centers, or its willingness to tackle impunity of perpetrators.
Thank you. Me permito informarles que la lista de oradores.
I'd like to inform you that the list of speakers has been closed. I would like to inform you that the list of speakers has now been closed. As is our practice in the Council, we will start by hearing from the delegation of the country concerned. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Eritrea.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation does not wish to waste the time of this august body to indulge in acronymous exchange with the Special Rapporteur. The selective bias inherent in the so-called testimonies and that she brandishes the lack of professionalism in her overall approach, the political bias and the agenda that has made her recycled report are these days too well known and acknowledged by a growing number of governments and neutral bodies. In this respect, we see no dividend in dwelling on the statement. Last year alone, 112,000 Eritreans in diaspora visited their homeland as part and parcel of their routine vacations and also to celebrate the country's 25th anniversary. When the Special Rapporteur issued its vitriolic report on Eritrea, the biased testimonies of some 250 or so asylum seekers of dubious credibility, over 42,000 Eritreans wrote to her protesting against the unfounded and politically motivated vilification campaigns on their country. But the Special Rapporteur is avidly obsessed with advancing the agenda of regime change of notorious quislings in foreign countries. Indeed, she has no time to listen to the people of Eritrea. In the circumstance, the humble request of the Eritrean delegation to this august body is to end this charade once again and by terminating the mandate. Mr. President, let me avail of this occasion to briefly highlight two matters that have a bearing on the subject matter. The first is the risk of politicizing the Human Rights Council by resorting to country-specific instruments which are not productive and constructive. This practice is fraught and with the risk of resuscitating the malicious and follies that rendered ineffective the predecessor of the body 11 years ago. In the event, Eritrea appeals for clarity and universality of methodology and neutrality of instruments that the Human Rights Council employs. A related subject is the right of states to be elected as member of the Council. The current practice bars states under special procedure from considering for membership of the Council. In the event when the original accusation itself is flawed, the practice entails double injury to the parties concerned, especially in the absence of rigorous criterion for assessing the eligibility of the candidates. Accordingly, Eritrea requests for a thorough review of this procedure. Other critical procedural issues relate to the 5-minute response time for a country under special mechanism. This is no fairness and parity when the accused party is restricted to respond in barely 5 minutes to lengthy reports, sometimes 500 pages long from the plaintiff. Another procedural hurdle which affects negatively a country under special mechanism is the denial of concerned observer state to react to a resolution where another observer state is privileged to table a resolution, with procedural matters impact negatively in concerned state by restricting latitude for greater discussions and generally undermining fair play and level playing fields. Mr. President, let me now turn to progress on fast-tracking human rights in part of the overall development programs with the focus on the implementation of the UPR working group recommendations that my government has accepted. 1. National service. As explained in various previous occasions, the prolonged national service has been imposed on Eritrea due to the threats of war that continue unabated. The state of affairs notwithstanding, the government of state of Eritrea has introduced in the past 2 years a raft of measures, including harmonization and substantial increments on the civil service salary scale. As a result, national service members, the majority of whom are assigned to professional and civilian tasks, as well as those who remain in military, are obtaining remunerations that are congruent with their professional skills and occupational service. The government also continues to demobilize female member states as a continuous effort. Mr. President, on legal issues, the sensitization campaign on the revised Eritrean civil and penal codes and their procedural codes have continued to be undertaken in a rigorous manner through public meetings, weekly TV, radio programs, as well as constant columns in the printed press. The campaigns will consolidate public knowledge and full awareness of the laws of the country to enhance the rule of law. UPR. Coordinated efforts and expand government engagements and cooperation have been stepped up. The first coordinated yearly evaluation was conducted in December 2016 in Asmara, the capital. The evaluation has led to planning on wider scale by critically assessing the ongoing progress. Agreement was reached to fast-track and undertake a midterm formative evaluation in May 2017. This will enhance continuous follow-up and preparation for the third cycle of the UPR report. In general, significant strides have been made in the implementation of many areas, in particular in the administration of justice, in areas of development and social equality, in penitentiary system, in engagements and international cooperation. For cooperation with UN. Cooperation in the implementation of the UPR.
Como parte de nuestro diálogo interactivo.
As part of our interactive dialogue, I'd like to now invite interested delegations to make their questions for the mandate holder and make their comments. Can I remind you that the speaking time limit is 2 minutes for all? And bearing that in mind, I'd now like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Gracias, Presidente. The European Union thanks the Special Rapporteur for her oral update. We remain deeply concerned about the overall human rights situation in Eritrea. We do, however, welcome some positive developments, such as Eritrea's continued support for a moratorium on the death penalty. We also welcome the cooperation with the delegation of the OHCHR that undertook another visit to Eritrea. We reiterate the call made by the HRC in June 2016 to Eritrea to consider inviting the OHCHR to establish a presence of the office in the country. We reiterate our call on Eritrea to cooperate fully with all UN bodies and with the international community on human rights issues, including by cooperating with the Special Rapporteur and granting her full access to the country. We agree with the Special Rapporteur that substantial improvements in the human rights situation and the provision of accountability for crimes and human rights violations are needed. We call on the government to take forward substantial legal and institutional reforms to improve the respect for human rights, including political rights and freedoms, and the rule of law. We commend the government for its willingness to work with the UN and the EU in implementing the UPR recommendations it has accepted and urge it to take concrete measures to this end. The European Union also hopes to see progress made on the wider peace and security situation, including on the resolution of the border dispute. Mr. President, the European Union would like to ask the Special Rapporteur, how can the cooperation of Eritrea with some UN bodies be further enhanced in order to improve the human rights situation in the country? Muchas gracias, Presidente.
La delegación del Reino Unido tiene el...
Thank you. United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United Kingdom would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for her work. The UK shares her concerns on the human rights situation in Eritrea and that the international community's engagement with Eritrea is important to achieving human rights reform. In this regard, the UK continues to call on the government of Eritrea to honour its international human rights obligations and to cooperate fully with the UN human rights system. The UK continues to encourage the government of Eritrea to allow the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Eritrea access to the country. We do welcome Eritrea's renewed engagement with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and look forward to increased engagement in the future. We especially welcome the government agreeing a 4-year implementation programme with the United Nations Development Programme to take forward the recommendations of the 2014 Universal Periodic Review. We also hope to see progress made on the wider peace and security situation, including on the resolution of the border dispute. Mr. President, in our increased bilateral engagement, we have made clear that we want to see tangible improvements in the country's human rights through amendment of Eritrea's national service system, implementation of its constitution, and the release of those subject to arbitrary detention. Mr. President, we would like to ask the Special Rapporteur how she plans to engage with UNDP to take forward the UPR recommendations. We would also like to ask the Special Rapporteur for her views on how else the international community can work with Eritrea to improve human rights. Thank you, Mr. President.
Francia tiene...
France, you have the floor. President, France associates itself with the statement made by the EU. We'd like to thank the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea for her oral presentation. France, yet again, would encourage the Eritrean authorities to cooperate with the Special Rapporteur, and indeed with all the UN mechanisms, including giving them access to the territory. Cooperation with human rights mechanisms is, for the authorities, real opportunities of exchanging views and submitting their viewpoints. Human rights situation in Eritrea continues to require Council's attention. France would recall its deep concern as regards the conclusions of the Commission of Inquiry, according to which some human rights violations committed in the country could constitute crimes against humanity, given their systematic and generalized nature. We'd urge the Eritrean authorities to act to help improve the situation of human rights and fundamental freedoms in their country, particularly by taking tangible measures to implement, with the support of the EU and the United Nations, those recommendations that they accepted as part of the Universal Periodic Review. Contacts established between Eritrean authorities and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, including visits, are extremely positive, and we would encourage Eritrea to continue along that path and envisage the creation of a local OHCHR office in line with a resolution that was adopted by this Council. Madam Special Rapporteur, in the June 2016 resolution, the Human Rights Council encouraged the African Union to establish an inquiry with a view to be able to prosecute those perpetrators of human rights violations identified in the Commission of Inquiry's report. I'd like to know, what contacts do you envisage with the African Union in that regard? Thank you. Thank you. Switzerland, you have the floor. Thank you, President. Switzerland would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for her presentation. Her report, and indeed that of the Commission of Inquiry submitted last year, certainly set out a very worrying image of the human rights situation in Eritrea. Particularly, Eritreans still have to carry out national service for an undetermined period of time, and many of them flee the country because of persecution that they face. Switzerland would call on the Eritrean government to put an end to the serious violations of human rights in the country and constructively engage so as to implement the Commission of Inquiry's recommendations. And in that regard, Switzerland restates its readiness to pursue a dialogue with the UN mechanisms and agencies, as well as with Eritrea, and to cooperate with the latter in order to improve the human rights situation in the country. Switzerland would call on the Eritrean government to guarantee unrestricted access to the country for the Special Rapporteur. In addition, I would recall the encouragement addressed by this Council to Eritrea during the 32nd session, namely to invite the Office of the High Commissioner to establish a presence in the country with a general mandate. Madam Rapporteur, this is our question. Along with others, we would like to know how you are cooperating with the UN country team in Eritrea, and more particularly with the UNDP office. Thank you.
La delegación de Bélgica.
Thank you. Belgium, you have the floor. Thank you, President. Belgium endorses the EU statement. Madam Kitterhout, Belgium would like to thank you for your oral presentation. We take note of your comments. We deplore the fact that Eritrea still is not giving you access to their territory. Belgium, notwithstanding that, globally shares your assessment of the situation in the country as regards human rights. It's extremely worrying, and progress is far too limited for us to consider that a substantial change has been brought about. This has to do with this unlimited conscription policy adopted and those practices which could be tantamount to forced labour. Belgium would call the government to immediately implement its commitment to put an end to this policy and to limit this military service in practice to a reasonable period of time. Other serious violations and attacks on human rights continue to be committed systematically. Arbitrary detention, enforced disappearances, the absence of a democratic space and independent press, imposed restrictions on freedom of expression, association, opinion, as well as the fact that NGOs are not able to operate freely. All these are major obstacles to the inclusive development of this country, fully respecting the rights of its citizens. Belgium, however, notes with appreciation the commitment of the government as part of the SDG process and its desire to cooperate with the international community in implementing those recommendations made during its UPR. Madam Kitterhout, could you give us more details as to your dialogue with the African Union when it comes to following up on the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry, particularly opening up an inquiry into human rights violations committed in the country? Many thanks, President.
La República Bolivariana.
Thank you. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. You have the floor. Ambassador. Thank you, President. For reasons of principle, Venezuela does not support initiatives targeting specifically developing countries, all the more so when these mandates do not enjoy the acceptance of the country concerned. We have denounced the fact that with these sorts of mandates, some spaces and fora are being used to act as instruments against sovereign countries, which certainly do not help improve the human rights situation. This sort of initiative violates the principles of the UN Charter, namely respect for the integrity, sovereignty and non-interference in the domestic affairs of states. The UPR is an ideal mechanism to promote international cooperation via a dialogue between equals and without politicization. Once again, we would restate the pressing need to ensure that this Council complies with its mandate to promote and protect human rights based on genuine dialogue and cooperation, adhering to the principle of universality without calling on coercion, politicization and double standards. Therefore, we deplore the imposition of these sorts of specific mandates against countries. Thank you, President.
La delegación de China.
China, you have the floor.
Mr. President, the Chinese delegation takes note of the presentation by the Special Rapporteur. China has always maintained that differences in the human rights movement should be dealt with through constructive dialogue and cooperation. The international community should recognize the progress and achievements of Eritrea in promoting and protecting human rights. Human rights are a significant part of a state's economic and social development and must be promoted according to a country's conditions and its people's needs. China calls on the international community to look objectively at the challenges and difficulties faced by Eritrea as a developing country in promoting and protecting human rights and provide technical assistance according to the country's wishes and needs in order to help the country enhance capacity building. Countries in the Horn of Africa are close neighbors who form an entity of the common destiny and solidarity. They are all good friends and partners and brothers of China. China hopes sincerely that countries in this region will strengthen their friendship and unity in the interest of peace, stability and the people's fundamental interests and settle their differences through dialogue. This is in the common interests of the countries in this region. Thank you, Mr. President.
La delegación de Cuba.
The delegation of Cuba, you have the floor. Thank you, President. As a position of principle, Cuba has always objected to selective initiatives and approaches against developing countries. We believe that this does not contribute to fostering this new cooperative approach that we want to confer on the work undertaken by the Human Rights Council. We deeply believe that international cooperation, dialogue and respectful exchange of views between countries on the basis of respect for the UN Charter's principles, we believe that that is the most effective way of ensuring that we can achieve higher levels of promotion and human rights protection standards. We would make an appeal that a new chance should be given for cooperation, that we have direct involvement of regional and sub-regional organizations in the African region when it comes to looking at these issues that are subjects of concern, and when it comes to finding effective solutions. This would include the Eritrean authorities. It would address their concerns, and at the end of the day, it would achieve the goal of helping the Eritrean people. We don't believe that punitive approaches or sanctions could actually make us get any closer to achieving those goals. Thank you.
La delegación de los Estados
Thank you. United States of America, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Special Rapporteur, for your presentation. Last year, the Commission of Inquiry you served on concluded there are reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed in Eritrea since 1991. The human rights situation remains grave, and Eritreans continue to flee their own country. Under these circumstances, it is vital that the Council continue its efforts to monitor and identify ways to improve the situation. One of the most serious concerns is the indefinite period of forced participation in national service, well exceeding the country's own 18-month limit. This practice deprives young people of the opportunity to pursue their personal and professional dreams and robs the country of the energy, innovation, and economic contributions of people entering the workforce and building their lives. Ending this practice remains one of the most important actions the government of Eritrea could take to improve the lives of its citizens. We continue to urge Eritrea to respect its constitution, hold national elections, develop an independent and transparent judiciary, improve detention conditions, and release individuals arbitrarily detained, including political prisoners, journalists, and members of religious groups. We strongly encourage the government of Eritrea to engage fully with the international community and the UN, and we call on the government to grant the Special Rapporteur access to the country. We have previously noted the government's willingness to work on several Universal Periodic Review recommendations and welcome its cooperation with the international community in this endeavor. The United States stands firmly with the Eritrean people and supports their pursuit of the protection of all their human rights. Madam Special Rapporteur, we would like to ask, what can the members of the international community do to help you fulfill your mandate? Thank you.
Sudán tiene el uso de la palabra.
Sudan, you have the floor.
Mr. President, the delegation of the Sudan has carefully followed the oral update of the Special Rapporteur on Eritrea and would like to make the following remarks. 1. We remain confident that the consent and cooperation between the mandate holder and the concerned country represents the sole alternative to achieving tangible progress on the ground, and that no positive results could be achieved in the absence of dialogue and mutual respect. 2. My delegation considers that the UBR mechanism provides an appropriate framework to enhance the international cooperation in the field of human rights, where all states are treated on equal footing, and strongly rejects the utilization of this August Council in procedural mechanism to achieve political goals and objectives. 3. In conclusion, Mr. President, my delegation encourages Eritrea to continue its engagement with the international community, and we believe that support and technical assistance should be provided to Eritrea to implement its obligation under the accepted UBR recommendations and other human rights mechanisms. Thank you.
La delegación de Noruega.
Thank you. Norway, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Norway would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for her efforts. As a long-standing friend of the Eritrean people, we remain deeply concerned by the reports of the grave human rights violations and the lack of accountability for crimes committed. It is vital that the Eritrea-Ethiopia Boundary Commission decision of 2002 be implemented. However, this issue does not legitimize the violation of Eritrea's human rights obligations. Norway appreciates the intention of the government of Eritrea to collaborate with the international community on the implementation of accepted UPR recommendations. We stand ready to support. We also welcome the collaboration with and the recent visits by the OHCHR to Eritrea. We encourage Eritrea to extend an invitation to the Office of the High Commissioner to establish an office in the country. We urge the government to consider extending further invitations to special rapporteurs working on civil political rights as well as economic, social and cultural rights. We encourage the government to increase efforts aimed at ensuring that the Eritrean people may enjoy life guided by a constitution in compliance with international human rights obligations. A question to the Special Rapporteur. How do you assess developments of the situation for economic and social rights in Eritrea? I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Djibouti, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Djibouti welcomes Ms. Kitarut and would like to thank her for her oral report on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. My delegation commends the Special Rapporteur for her efforts and the initiatives undertaken to follow up on the implementation of the recommendation of the Commission of Inquiry, including its contact with the African Union. My delegation deplores the fact that the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea was not allowed to address the UN General Assembly and to engage a dialogue at its 71st session as requested by Resolution 32/24 of Human Rights Council. Mr. President, Djibouti reiterates its concern about the findings of the Commission of Inquiry on the situation of human rights in Eritrea and the reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed since 1991. It is deplorable that the government of Eritrea continues to fail to fulfill its international obligation by not respecting the various relevant resolutions of the UN bodies, including the Human Rights Council ones. While we were pleased to welcome back 4 prisoners freed last year, my delegation remains deeply concerned about the fate of the 13 remaining Djiboutian prisoners detained incommunicado in Eritrea since 2008 and urges Eritrea to fully engage and cooperate with the Special Rapporteur as well as with all relevant stakeholders in order to provide information on their whereabouts. Since the presentation of the Commission report on its call for accountability, it is clear that it can't be business as usual. So, Madam Rapporteur, how Member States could further assist you in carrying out your mandate in implementing the recommendation of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea? Thank you for your attention.
Belarus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would once again like to reaffirm the position of my country concerning Human Rights Council's country mandates. We think that these mandates are selective and politicized. They are incapable of promoting progress in the field of human rights, both within countries and internationally, speaking in terms of international cooperation. The Council and human rights mechanisms must continue their efforts to establish a true dialogue with Eritrea and to give the country technical assistance and provide the country technical support in accordance with national requirements and priorities, taking into account the recommendations that were accepted by Eritrea as part of the Universal Periodic Review. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Somali, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we welcome and thank the Special Rapporteur, Ms. Sheila Keith-Ruth, for her oral presentation today to update us on the human rights situation in Eritrea. We also welcome the second report delivered by the Commission of Inquiry on the human rights situation in Eritrea on the last session, despite the rapporteur not being able to have access to the country in assessing the situation on the ground. My delegation recognizes that the government of Eritrea has taken some steps to promote gender equality, including eradication of FGM. Somalia has continuously supported the Eritrean people's right to a life free of fear and harm. We are therefore disturbed by the Special Rapporteur's findings that there are existing of human rights violations and that there hasn't been improvement since the last report. It's vital that the voices of Eritrean victims of human rights abuses be heard and bring the perpetrators to justice. Furthermore, we call on Eritrea to clarify fate of all political prisoners, including the 13 Djiboutians prisoners of war, and by respecting its obligation under the international human rights law to remove any barrier to their families and humanitarian organizations. Mr. President, promotion on human rights and protection should be placed very high in the domestic and international agenda. Therefore, we call Eritrea to respect international human rights and humanitarian law and fully respect the expression of Eritrean citizens' liberty as an inviolable right. I thank you, Mr. President.
La delegación.
Thank you. Ireland, you have the floor.
Ireland aligns with the EU statement and adds the following. Mr. President, Ireland thanks the Special Rapporteur for her presentation today and looks forward to her written report at the next session. We express our deep concern at the ongoing violations of human rights in Eritrea. We recall the findings and recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry, which remain fully relevant today. We note with disappointment the update of the Special Rapporteur that there is little to suggest that the human rights situation has changed and that she has observed no substantial or institutional legal reforms in Eritrea to hold perpetrators of human rights violations to account. We acknowledge that Eritrea faces many security and development challenges. However, international assistance to address these challenges must be matched with real and practical measures by the authorities themselves. Ireland continues to urge the government of Eritrea to end the practice of indefinite national service, which prevents Eritrean citizens from being able to plan for the future and contributes to significant outward migration. We continue to urge progress on accountability for past and persistent human rights violations, including enslavement, imprisonment, enforced disappearances and torture. Further, Ireland again calls for the necessary legal reforms, as set out in detail in the report of the COI, including full implementation of the 1997 Constitution and significant reform of the justice system so as to ensure rule of law in the state. We urge Eritrea to regard OHCHR, the Council and its mechanisms, including the Special Rapporteur, as a supportive partner in this process of reform. Special Rapporteur, we recall the recommendation of the COI that third states should seek to strengthen engagement with the government of Eritrea. We would welcome further elaboration of your views on ways and means for states to do so, including through the Universal Periodic Review process. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Damos ahora.
Thank you. I'd now like to turn to the list of speakers for national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. I'd now like to give the floor to International Fellowship of Reconciliation. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The International Fellowship of Reconciliation and Human Rights Concern Eritrea thanks the Special Rapporteur for continuing to highlight the egregious human rights situation in Eritrea. Nothing has changed in the government's attitude of denial and complete refusal to engage with her mandate, despite the recommendations from this Council and the Commission of Inquiry. Nothing has changed in the nation. There have still been no elections. There is no right to protest or to assemble in public, no religious liberty, no political parties, no unions, no human rights organizations, and no independent judiciary. Due to lack of accountability by the government and failure to meet even the most basic of human provisions, today Eritreans face acute water shortages. 2 million citizens are without adequate food supplies, and up to half the children in rural areas suffer stunt growth due to malnutrition. Government rationing system imposed for political control contribute to major food shortages. There are thousands of internally displaced citizens, many reduced to begging or dying of starvation. There is a major cash shortage brought about by the government restrictions, making people's savings unavailable to them, and thereby forcing private business to close down nationwide. Privately owned buses have been decommissioned, while the state-owned bus services are wholly inadequate. All citizens over 18 are conscripted into the military indefinitely and forced into kind of slave labor in mining and government-owned industries, factories and construction companies for just $10 to $30 per month. It is no wonder that 60,000 citizens risk their life to leave the country, escaping crimes against humanity every year despite the shoot-to-kill border policy. Thank you.
Concedo la palabra.
I give the floor to Advocates for Human Rights.
Dear President and Special Rapporteur, The Advocates for Human Rights welcomes the update from the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. We particularly welcome the Special Rapporteur's as well as the preceding Commission of Inquiry's emphasis on the crimes of enslavement and arbitrary detention, as well as on the need for accountability. As an NGO that provides free legal services to asylum seekers in the U.S., the Advocates for Human Rights would particularly like to draw attention to the issues of forced recruitment and detention that the Special Rapporteur has highlighted. Our clients from Eritrea, who have been forced to flee the human rights conditions detailed by the Special Rapporteur, have shared with us firsthand accounts that corroborate the ongoing serious situation in Eritrea. For example, both male and female Eritrean clients report forcible conscription into national military service and forced labor under harsh conditions, including hard labor. Our Eritrean clients report that they experience frequent beatings, torture, and denial of food and water during their military service, which often lasts indefinitely. One of our Eritrean clients escaped only after 10 years of forced labor. Medical orders exempting one disabled client from service were disregarded. Additionally, our Eritrean clients report being arrested, interrogated, detained, and tortured on religious or national origin grounds, or for speaking out against the government. Clients report being detained in deplorable conditions, including one who was held in a shipping container for 6 months under extremely hot conditions. The Advocates for Human Rights remain deeply concerned about the thousands of asylum seekers fleeing Eritrea, the additional human rights abuses and loss of life they face in flight, and the detention and risk of forcible return that they face in countries of asylum. The Advocates for Human Rights calls upon the Human Rights Council to continue the mandate on the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea and keep the situation of Eritrea on its agenda, and urge all member states to respect Eritreans' right to freedom of movement and the right to seek and enjoy asylum, and to ensure that the UNHCR has access to all detained Eritreans seeking refugee protection. Thank you.
Concedo la palabra
I give the floor to East and Horn of Africa Human Rights Defenders Project.
Mr. President, on behalf of the Eastern Horn of Africa Human Rights Defenders Project and the Information Firm for Eritrea, I would like to thank the Special Rapporteur, Mrs. Sheila Keith-Harroud, for providing an update that reflects the reality in Eritrea today. The Eritrean regime is about to celebrate its 26th year in power, while the Eritrean population continues to live in fear. Since the end of the mandate of the Commission of Inquiry, we have yet to see improvements in the lives of everyday people. The terror, the abuse of power have weakened the Eritrean society at its core. According to Médecins Sans Frontières, fleeing Eritreans sustain severe scars, both physical and psychological. Mr. President, in June last year, Eritreans showed up en masse to demonstrate their support for the Commission of Inquiry in front of this very building, and they have not been heard. The international community has failed to act in accordance with the gravity of the Commission of Inquiry's report. A government has been accused of committing crimes against humanity, and it is the duty of this Council and its members to ensure that the individuals responsible are prosecuted. Finally, I urge the Eritrean government to act responsibly during this migratory crisis and to substantially demonstrate political will to solve it, not by discreetly introducing coercive measures within the country, but by providing relief and dignity to each individual. Because today, Mr. President, although they are very well aware of the many dangers on the path to Europe and the tightening of European asylum policies, many young Eritreans still consider that their lives are safer on rafts in the Mediterranean or in freezing camps in Europe than in their home country.
Tiene la palabra Jubilee Campaign.
I give the floor to Jubilee Campaign.
Thank you, Mr. President. Jubilee Campaign, together with Christian Solidarity Worldwide, thank the Special Rapporteur for her oral update. In a resolution passed in July 2016, the Council accepted the Commission of Inquiry on Eritrea's findings that crimes against humanity are being and have been committed in a widespread and systematic manner. It mandated the Special Rapporteur to follow up on implementation of the Commission's recommendations and called for Eritrea to cooperate fully with her and permit her unrestricted access to the country. We note with regret the government's continuing non-engagement, as we feel constructive engagement with the Special Rapporteur, the OHCHR and other special procedures would serve as a genuine indication of commitment towards ensuring human rights. Therefore, we call for renewed international efforts towards identifying perpetrators of atrocity crimes and bringing them before a regional or international judicial mechanism. Mr. President, the resolution's recommendations include a call for Eritrea to respect the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion or belief. However, this continues to be violated. For example, in December 2016, a significant number of Christians were arrested in Asmara after being found praying and were transported barefoot to an unknown location. In addition, we remain concerned at the continuing incommunicado detention of Abune Antonius, the legitimate Orthodox Patriarch, despite reports of his imminent release in August 2016. Eritreans continue to flee in large numbers, and the resolution called on the international community to strengthen efforts and collaboration to ensure their protection. Thus, it is deeply concerning that European countries are partnering with repressive nations, including Eritrea, in order to contain vulnerable refugees and asylum seekers in countries where they have already experienced maltreatment. Also concerning is the case of 35 detained Eritrean asylum seekers in the US who are in danger of refoulement because the immigration judge is not conversant with Eritrean situation. We urge all signatories to the international and regional refugee conventions to respect the principle of non-refoulement and provide sanctuary and protection to Eritrean refugees. Thank you, Mr. President.
I give the floor to Civicus.
Mr. President, Civicus expresses its appreciation to the Special Rapporteur on Eritrea for the work she has done to highlight the worst human rights violations and the overall dire situation in Eritrea. We also laud the Commission of Inquiry for the findings and recommendations presented in the report of the Commission. Sadly, there has not been any major improvements regarding human rights violations since the publication of the report. On the contrary, Eritreans continue to be subjected to enslavement, compulsory and indefinite military service, torture, enforced disappearances, arbitrary detention, sexual and gender-based violence, and reprisals against family members who flee the country or those arrested for offending the regime. Mr. President, the human rights situation in Eritrea remains dire to the extent that the government accuses most of those currently in detention of committing acts of treason or espionage. Such accusations stem from actions by Eritreans that include asking for information about a family member in detention, offending a senior government official, attempting to leave Eritrea, and practicing an unauthorized religion. The absence of an independent judiciary, a constitution, and democratic and human rights institutions means that the victims of these human rights violations have no recourse to justice. Impunity persists, and those who have been subjected to enforced disappearances remain unaccounted for. We urge the Human Rights Council to renew the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Eritrea and provide the mandate holder with the human and financial resources needed to continue the work on Eritrea. We call on the government of Eritrea to fully implement the 1997 Constitution, allow human rights defenders and civil society organizations to function without restrictions from the state, and limit the national service to 18 months in line with the Proclamation on National Service. Thank you, Mr. President.
I now call upon the European solidarity towards equal participation of people.
Mr. President, I am an Eritrean human rights defender, and I make this statement on behalf of Eurostep. Let me start by commending the continued effort of this Council and the Special Rapporteur in trying to find a lasting solution to the appalling situation of gross human rights violations in Eritrea. I also need to emphasize on the fact that the most serious international crimes of concern must not go unpunished. The ongoing situation of crimes against humanity in Eritrea requires tangible steps in order to seek accountability and secure truth, justice and redress for victims. The population of Eritrea must be protected from crimes against humanity by invoking the principle of the responsibility to protect. It merits repetition that accountability for atrocity crimes is not a matter of choice or convenience, but of legal obligation, thus making it imperative for this Council to adopt stringent accountability mechanisms for the situation of crimes against humanity in Eritrea. It's important to ensure that the situation of human rights violations in Eritrea remains active in the periodic sessions of this Council. While this can be given effect by the continued renewal, expansion and broadening of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur, it's also equally important to adopt tangible follow-up mechanisms in order to give effect to the set of accountability measures proposed by the second report of the COI. One missing element in this regard is the appointment of an independent group of experts which shall exclusively focus on accountability mechanisms. We call on the Council to take this effort to the next level by adopting tangible accountability measures. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Ms. Kita-Ruth to provide her concluding observations. You have 10 minutes, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to each and everyone who has been part of this interactive dialogue. I would like to, 10 minutes is not going to be enough to look at all the issues, so I'll touch on a few key ones, really. I'd like to respond to the honorable representative of the government of Eritrea that, yes, I have heard of a salary increase, but according to my information, after mandatory deductions, the changes do not amount to factual increases and it would still be below the standard wage of workers in similarly economically disadvantaged countries. And most importantly, would not have any impact on the involuntary nature of the servitude. Having said that, I'd like to talk briefly about cooperation of Eritrea with some UN bodies and further enhance in order to improve the human rights situation in the country. It is something which I really appreciate. I think it is very needed. Isolation is not going to solve in any way the situation of human rights. However, there needs to be measured progress, not just for the convenience of engaging, that be it UN and other stakeholders should not bear into account the real issues amounting to human rights violations, amounting to crimes against humanity in the country. These need to be addressed in any relationship and any engagement, and there needs to be measured and tangible progress. Then I'd like to, there has been specific questions to me whether, how do I plan to engage with UNDP to take forward the UPR recommendations? Very honestly, Mr. President, and very bluntly, is that my almost 5 years as Special Rapporteur, despite human rights up front, I have had minimal, if not non-existent, relationship with the UNDP team in Eritrea, or with the country team. So this is the situation which I put before the Council. The other point I'd like to raise, which has been put to me, is yes, the African Union has been encouraged by the Commission of Inquiry to have its own inquiry into the situation of human rights and to see what accountability measures that could be taken. I would like to report to this Council at this point that my conversations are but preliminary, which need to be deepened. And I do hope that at the next occasion I will have stronger comments to make. But there has been established relation, or rather, the beginning of conversation is there. The other point I'd like to raise is with regards to with regards to the rights of women, the question asked by Belgium, one of the two questions asked by Belgium. Yes, I am aware of little progress made in the context of prosecution for FGM, the crime of FGM. There are things which are happening. However, one would need to know how many prosecutions in a country where the prevalence of FGM is quite high. So there's a matter of balancing and seeing how far have the authorities gone in pursuing this matter. Well, how can members of the international community help to the mandate holder to fulfill her mandate? Simple. Making sure that human rights in Eritrea remain very high on the agenda. Secondly, do not forget that the Commission of Inquiry has, in fact, said that there's reason to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed. One cannot forget that. And just to say that justice and human rights, as well as the whole issue of crimes against humanity, need to be put in the context, because these are the twin, justice and peace, as well as human rights, are concepts which are interlinked. One cannot go against, one cannot be divided from the other. They are linked, and if there is a problem with human rights, justice will suffer, and same with peace. So these are issues which really have to be put into the real context of Eritrea. With regards to how do I assess the economic and social rights in Eritrea, I have had long reflection on the matter. I have looked at the situation right from the beginning. I have tried my best to assess, but I would like to say at this point, if the main right, that is the right to work, is violated through the national service. This, in fact, is the violation of a very, very important economic right. So it impacts on all the assessment of all the other economic rights and social rights, which then has an incidence on the migratory flow. So the number one violation of an economic right in Eritrea is, in fact, the forced and indefinite national service. And finally, Mr. President, the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry are very strong and very clear and cannot be left, unattended to. There has been calls from members of the NGOs and from others, but absolutely it cannot be business as usual at the Council and elsewhere within the UN family and in the world with member states. To end my last words, in conclusion, I would like to say that impunity for human rights violations and accountability for crimes against humanity should remain among the top priorities of the government of Eritrea, first of all, and of the international community. The international community should continue raising rights as a recurrent point of discussion until such a time that demonstrated and measurable improvements in the whole spectrum of human rights in Eritrea is recorded, not only in a selective group of rights. I would also like to say that I continue to remain open to constructive dialogue with the government of Eritrea. However, I'd like to reiterate my victim-centered approach. My work and that of the COI brought to the international community the long muted voices that we have all had to hear of victims. Those are the voices that the international community need to stand with, the voices which should not be ignored in the eagerness to re-engage with Eritrea. With this, I thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Rapporteur, for that concluding presentation. We have concluded our interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. I would like to thank Ms. Kitterud once again for her presentation, and I would also like to thank all the participants for their contributions. We will resume our meeting after a brief technical break to begin our interactive dialogue with the Commission of Inquiry on Burundi. Thank you.